Start the recording and let people into the room. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the Thursday session of our Back to School series of talks, and I am so excited for this talk today. We have got such a special guest in Dr. Sydney Conroy. Before I hand it over to introduce herself, I've just got to say this woman is an absolute rock star. Not only has she just finished her PhD out of Cambridge, but she is a therapist, a writer, a creator, and is just absolutely incredible when it comes to talking about mental health. And if you don't follow her on social media, I highly recommend you go and do that straight away because you will not regret it. So Sydney, welcome to Accepted.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of about your day to day, which seems insane because you've got a whole lot of stuff that you do all the time.
Yeah,
And maybe just a really high level philosophy on mental health.
yeah, absolutely. So I am a therapist by training. I was trained in something called existential phenomenology, which means I just love to sit with people on a spiral about like life's biggest questions. So I do that. And then I also got trained in play therapy, which is when you think about talk therapy, there's words and then there's stories, right? So for play therapy, the toys are the words, the play is the story, and it functions in pretty much the same way. So I always joke with people that I work from 2 to 92 in the psychotherapy space. I love it a lot. I had no intention of doing a PhD. It was not a huge part of my like life plan, but the pandemic happened and I was seeing a lot of things really interesting clinically, and just had a lot of personal questions as I was going through that time. And so I decided I had something that I wanted to follow here. And so I ended up applying to do a PhD. I moved abroad from Seattle to Cambridge, and started with a play lab. It's called Pedal. So it's play in education, development, and learning. And so I got to do my PhD on play therapy and how do play therapists think about mental health recovery. If we think about the pandemic as collective trauma, what does that mean to successfully move out of that time? Will we ever? Um, and so now that I've finished the PhD, I am doing a lot of part-time things because I realized during that time, that I loved having multiple projects going at the same time. I liked my brain working different capacities. And so I opened a private practice for people that live in Washington State virtually. So that's part-time for students. I mostly am working with people in sort of transitional phases. I write on Substack. I do a advice column on there for students. And I also am doing a mini series on how do we set boundaries with machine learning products like AI and ChatGPT, and what does that look like for interpersonal relationships, but also our working relationships. So that's something that also was born out of my PhD, which was like, how do we get more knowledge into the hands of people outside of just publishing papers, excuse me. I also created a planner that I'm hoping to put into physical form, but right now it is just a digital planner, helping people create processes that include mental health to be successful in academia. I do part-time data annotation work for a psychedelic clinical trial. So there's something called like a treatment-resistant depression. And so what does that look like if we introduce psychedelics in that? Can we get some movement for that? Um, yeah, that feels like everything right now. I'm waiting on like a really exciting research contract that I hope comes through, and I will do some like children's media stuff, which I think will be exciting. Um, but yeah, we'll see. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And I guess my philosophy to like tie it all together, um, is something that I started saying. I was doing trauma-informed football coaching or like soccer coaching with youth boys, and I was telling them like when you feel better, you do better, which is sort of an adage on Maya Angelou's when you know better, you do better. And so for mental health, I feel like the world is hard enough. Like there's no reason we should be working against our brains and our bodies and our well-being. And so that's sort of the thread between everything that I do, essentially.
I mean, how? In what world? I mean, my goodness gracious, do you have like multiple personalities that you can adapt to do all of this kind of
I
work?
just, I love a project. I love a project. I get so much energy from just working on things for a couple hours and then like moving on, which I think like why the PhD worked for me so well was like I was so self-motivated in that like I will work on this paper and then I will go do this analysis and all of that. Um, so yeah, I don't know, it just feels natural to me, but it is a lot sometimes when I say it out loud. I'm like, I can probably nap more than I do.
I would recommend an app if I'm honest. Um, but I want to ask you this question because I don't quite understand. I'm really, really interested in this concept that you talk about, this play therapy that you talk
Mhm.
about, and you kind of have spoken about it as a crucial element for adults in academia, not just children.
Mhm.
Um, to kind of have fun and maintain mental health and foster creativity. Can you talk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah. So my favorite spiel on this is our brains and our bodies are really great threat detectors, meaning like evolutionarily, like they know this is in danger, this is a danger, this is a threat, right? But it's a really bad threat interpreter, which what I mean by that is like we get an email and our brains and our bodies respond to like there is a bear outside of our window, right? We're like, our supervisor just read my draft. I am like deeply afraid, right? And our bodies like just have not caught up to the fact that like that's not the same thing as like a swarm of bees coming to attack our head. Like we are safe. A lot of us in academic world or research world, like we work from home, we're on our screens, right? We have our little mugs of coffee. Some of us are like in slippers and pajamas and like inherently we are safe, right? But
Can
our
you
bodies
see
are
me?
like that's
Like,
yeah, I see right through your screen. But our bodies like still react, you know, they still get activated in that same way. And so I tell people play is really important because it cannot coexist with threats, right? And so like you do not see deers frolicking in a meadow, right, when there is a predator on the periphery. In the same way that like birds are not singing when there is like an immediate threat to an environment. And so we need play to sort of down our threat system almost and just say like we are
yeah,
safe and
okay.
like yes this teams meeting is atrocious and I'm like mad at this person and they left me a mean comment on my review and like I'm unhappy about it but that like it's not the same thing as like physically being unsafe in the way that our bodies are like interpreting that. And so I think play can feel very silly to people or like frivolous or like I don't need it in my life, but it's like actually a way to tell your body like, hey, thank you for being so protective and also we're okay, right? Like I can get through this like terrible comment or like review or edit or whatever, and it's not the same thing as me being like physically chased by a wolf, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then when you talk about play, like, what do you mean? What is your definition of play?
This is people have like had to define play in their PhDs for ages, and it's like a very contentious debate. Sadly, I like wish it wasn't. So I wish I had like a definition to give you, but it's something that is enjoyable in some capacity. Um, it can be video games. It can be playing with new flavors in the kitchen, new scents or smells, like going to make a perfume, making a candle. It can be sex. It can be going to play basketball. It can be X, Y, and Z. So it doesn't have to look one specific way. And that's something that I often tell people is like, don't get caught on like play equals this, right? Allow for some flexibility, be playful with what play is.
Yeah.
But I tell people, you know, and this doesn't come from like a specific stat necessarily, but like within 30 minutes of play a day can help sort of downregulate you to a place where like you have reminded your body that we are safe. But not in a way that like you have to put it in your schedule and you're gonna die if you don't do it. Like it's I don't mean it as like a way to like punish yourself if you don't do 30 minutes a day. But just something that feels like tangible and doable, and it can be, however you need it to be. Board games, laughing can be considered play, like a really safe sort of bouncing back and forth conversation can be play. So it can look a lot of different ways, but the point is to like soothe and sort of tell yourself that you are safe is
That you're
sort of
safe.
the reason we need it these days.
That is
Mhm.
so, so fascinating because I'm just thinking, I mean, we were talking just before this live stream went about writing for academic deadlines and how stressful that is. And it is that kind of constant fear of it's a fear reaction, right? It's a
Mhm.
survival reaction of like, I need to get this thing in by a certain deadline. And if I don't do it, there are consequences. And that sort of
Mhm.
survival instinct seems to kick in and cause this really intense environment, which is absolutely necessary. But
It is, and it's also
yeah,
like manufactured in some way for academia, right? There's like this
yeah,
forced sense of urgency. Like there are real deadlines and there are real consequences. And also like there's not an immediate consequence for a paper not being published, right?
yeah,
Like, or not in a way that is like life or death kind of
yeah.
consequence. And so I think the environment is like set up to make us feel very like afraid and uncertain and on edge all the time. And like there's very little at this point individually we can all do to like change that. But like the way that we can manage how threat and fear and anxiety lives in our bodies as we go through an academic program, let's say, um, matters and is in our control.
I think this touches on a point that you've mentioned in some of your content, which is this kind of turning point that led you to shift your mindset from by any means necessary to prioritizing your well-being.
Mhm.
And especially in sort of the competitive nature of academia. How did
Mhm.
you kind of come to that turning point and what did it mean for you during your academic journey?
Yeah, it was very clearly related to training to be a therapist for my master's because there wasn't exams and scores and things in the way that I traditionally thought of being in academia or in the education system, right? And so like my ability to do the reading and apply the work was like directly related to my ability to like meet somebody that I'm working with in a therapeutic space and like be present with them and like name emotions and like recognize patterns, right? And so like my ability to do well in school was related to that. It was suddenly now about like capacity and my own self-awareness rather than like this external thing that I was like, I need to get this score. I need to do well in this way. It needs to be published like this. And because the PhD wasn't in my mind at that point, I was kind of just like shifting my thought process about what it means to be a student just for like survival and like getting out of my program to be a therapist. Um, because it was like really heavy philosophy. I felt very like stripped down in terms of like what I thought I knew about the world and how I thought it operated and my place in it.
Yes.
And school was so deeply tied to that. And so that really like had to shift. But I had this like very distinct moment once I decided to apply to the PhD where I like sat down on the floor in the middle of lockdown with a journal and I literally wrote like my non-negotiables for applying to a PhD. And I just like wrote a list of things that like I needed to do to care for myself in order to step back into this space that could be very competitive and like has all this false sense of urgency and this like scarcity built into it,
Yeah.
right? And so I didn't know if I could do it, but I knew that I couldn't apply without telling myself, like, we cannot sacrifice the gains that we made in order to do it, right? It was not by any means necessary. It was like but like I needed to care for myself and I could not do the work that I wanted to do, especially studying collective trauma. Like I could not do that
Yes.
and be the way that I was in undergrad or even high school. Like in
Yes.
undergrad, I was like hospitalized because I was not taking care of myself, like deeply sick. And I was like, that will not fly when I am abroad and studying trauma and like 30 years old. Like I don't
Yes.
have somebody to like my mom is not going to fly across the country for this. And so like I have to be able to take care of myself. And so that yeah, I didn't want to lose sort of the ground that I gained during my master's
Yeah.
to do the PhD.
I really love that because essentially we've spoken about this a little bit this week, but this idea that you going into an academic program is actually you are the value, right?
Hmm.
You are the contributor, you are the commodity for want of a better word, right? Like
Yeah.
you are the selling point. And so often we go into these institutions and we go into these programs thinking that we have to be grateful for being there. And,
Mhm.
to some extent, maybe yes, but also most of the time, no, because we're in that and we are the ones that are providing the research and providing the value to that institution and to that society, and you taking that step back and realizing that before
Mhm.
even going into one of the most rigorous programs in an academic's life
Mhm.
is truly phenomenal. And I'm just curious, did you find that when you had that sort of mindset and you'd set it out like that, that when you went into Cambridge, that you kind of carried that forward with you throughout the program?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did. And I noticed it like influencing other people to take better care of themselves and like stand up for themselves in certain ways. And so I felt like really proud of the way that like I conducted that time of my life and like taking breaks. I did not like I worked 5 days a week, but I did not work 8 hours every single day. Like I did not force it when I couldn't get anything out. Like I would just take a break. I would play, like I did things that managed for that sort of like, I think about it a lot as like a self-trust thing. And I think it becomes much more serious when you put it in that light, where like I told myself that I was going to do this and like I need to be able to believe myself, right? Um, and so putting it sort of through that lens, I think was really important because it was like I told myself that I would take care of myself and I
Yeah.
have to. I
You
have
have
to.
to. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you do have to take care of yourself. I mean, you are the one producing the work. This is your choice to be here. This is your choice to contribute to the research.
Mhm.
This is I'm I watched a fantastic video last night and it's kind of stuck in my brain, but the video talked about the ideal academic and quoted
Mhm.
Samuel Johnson on the idea that the ideal academic is constantly learning and provides knowledge to the community. Like
Mhm.
those are the two facets of it. And as if that is your vocation, if that is your job, if you are the person that's doing it, you have to look after yourself. You got to maintain the vessel.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it's not going, you're
absolutely.
not going to be able to do what you planned on doing,
Hmm.
essentially.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think like, oh, people who feel like external or like producing more versus like being proud of the work that you do, like have a different relationship to academia. And I wrote about it a month ago about working from a place of devotion instead of discipline for the PhD, right? Like it was a love and a loyalty to the work and the content and the like topic that I was working for. And I think you can operate on such a different level when you come from that place rather than like discipline. I looked up the
Yeah,
definition and it was like a very punishment based, very like harsh. They like use the word weakness for like self-discipline, like you're working against weakness. And I was like, that's just called being a human being. Like there are things like you can frame it that way if you want, but like that's not really what that means. Um, and so yeah, I just working on that sort of angle, I think allows you to make space for yourself to do the work and like realizing you are the key ingredient to getting this stuff done.
I think this plays in really nicely to my next question, which is your term that you adopt of soft academia.
Hmm.
Um, and I think you using that word devotional rather than discipline kind of fits that framework so beautifully. So, can you talk to us a little bit about what you mean about soft academia and how this concept challenges those traditional academic norms of productivity and success?
Yeah, so I, similar to not thinking I would do a PhD, did not think about like starting an Instagram account. It wasn't like this like fully fledged idea. It came from like I did a study abroad during my undergrad and started writing like a travel blog, realized I absolutely hated it, and I was like, not gonna do this again. So I made an Instagram. And so I ended up using soft academia as a hashtag on that Instagram in sort of a way that was almost like level setting expectations for people that were like joining that space with me, that like I am probably going to cry on the internet, right? We are going to talk about failure and rejection, and like there is not space for you to come into my comment section and tell me I need to work harder or like I need to toughen up or like what, like that's just not what we're going to be doing in this space. And so that's kind of how it started. And it was sort of a like invitation to meet me in that if people wanted to. And then I sort of separated it from my personal experience and have thought it's become something very helpful as like a shorthand into considering that like the way that people exist in academia in the past does not have to be how we do it in the future. I read something by Dr. Ruha Benjamin, and it's called Imagination, a Manifesto. And I would recommend to everybody. But she talks a lot about how the systems that we operate in, like, are the imagination and are the dreams of other people, a very select group of people, right? And so, like, soft academia to me is sort of like a dreaming out loud of like what I would hope the education system and academia could look like in the future, that like we can make space for people to like be impacted by their data, that we can make space for people to like care about the work that they're doing, to have personal stories with it. I also saw a tweet one time that citation is our chosen genealogy. And so, like, what would it
Oh,
mean for someone to look at your reference pages and like know who you are based off of like who you cited and who you choose to like work with and read and consume? And is there diversity in that? And is it cross discipline? And so, like, that's an
that's
academia that I
so
want.
interesting.
I thought it
Yeah,
was like so beautiful. And so, like, all of that has sort of been like what I think soft academia is. It's like a lens shift or a framework shift for like more humanity in the work that we do as researchers and scientists and academics.
that is amazing because it is almost this idea of shifting the narrative around academia and around the institution and around what it's kind of developed into, which is this really sort of stressful and
Mm-hmm.
commodified
Mm-hmm.
institution. And I think there's something to be said on the those in academia, like supervisors, mentors, um, drivers of these places, because we have had in this community, we have had some real horror stories about supervisors and the
Mm-hmm.
way that they have acted towards members of our community and beyond, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose, what would you say is the role that these academic institutions and mentors to academics, what kind of role do they play in creating that supportive environment for students and researchers around their mental well-being?
Yeah. I mean, institutions should take more responsibility than they do in terms of like even just like pay people a living wage or like more than that because they deserve that, right? Like that is a direct correlation in people's mental health and well-being. So like that's something they could do and change if they chose to, right? And I think that there needs to be like systemic responsibility, like that needs to be forefront because these are system problems. And also, I think that individuals have some room to change some things and do some work in terms of like being supportive for people. So even just like doing a professional development with advisors or supervisors and like encouraging them at the start of a quarter or a semester to be like, hey, do you have any life events or holidays or something coming up that might impact your ability to work during this next group of time? Like that's humanizing. Like that matters to
Yeah.
people's well-being and mental health. And it's small, right? It doesn't require somebody to like, donate a whole bunch of money to make something happen.
Yeah.
So I think that there are like small shifts that can happen, but I don't want all of the responsibility to be placed on these individuals, right? But my supervisor, who was also the director of our center, was a psychiatrist by training and also a play researcher. And I think like similar to like how you can kind of always tell a kindergarten teacher, you can kind of tell who's a play researcher. So there's like a certain, I think, just like disposition to this. But he was so thoughtful and careful in ways that like mattered to the whole culture and environment of our center. Where like he would encourage us to not work every bank holiday. Like we would get an email for him saying like you are not expected to work, take this time off, right? Or we were in a college with like a beautiful rose garden, and when they would bloom, he would like at the bottom of an email be like, "Don't forget to take a little stroll in the garden today." Like, and that's so different from so many people's like supervisory relationships,
Yeah.
right? And all like small things, but they're like putting in mind like well-being and rest and like nature and beauty and all of those things like matter to the work that we do, but not everybody gets those relationships, right?
Yeah.
And even just like I had a question in one of my surveys around if therapists thought that any other collective trauma had happened outside of the pandemic or sort of during that time. And it was like hundreds of responses of like the worst things that have happened to society, right? It was like every mass shooting in the United States at a school by name. It was like every flood, every fire, every everything. And I was like, I can't, what am I supposed to do with like the worst of the worst? And these are like mental health professionals that are saying like these things are going to destroy people's well-being, right? Like, and I was just so overwhelmed by that. And it was like every time before we talked about output or how I was analyzing anything or whatever, he would always ask, like, how are you taking care of yourself? Right. And like we
Wow.
always started there. And like I know how rare that is. And I know that has something to
Yeah.
do with his background and all of that. So there is a way for people to work within systems that are bad for people's mental health, essentially, to help it be a better experience. So there is a responsibility there. Um, I don't know how we go about getting that changed for certain people and their personalities and their attitudes towards academia, right? Like it would be a fundamental like shift in how they approach the work that they do.
Yeah.
Um, so it's complicated. I think it's possible, but it's just it takes certain people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose you've kind of led on to my next question for you, which is, as you know, most supervisors or most mentors within the space are not, are not attuned to this. They don't support
Mhm.
it in the right way. And what would be your advice to members here in the community who are who need to make that stand for themselves, who need to make a
Mhm.
stand for their mental health? How would you say to them to go about it in a way that firms up their position while
Mhm.
also still ensuring that they don't rock the boat too much because unfortunately, we are in
Yeah.
an academic
Yeah.
institution, right? And we have to be cognizant of that.
Yes. I mean, I think it all takes a lot of like personal discernment and like situational information that obviously I don't have access to. So like I don't it's hard to say like this is the way to go forward. I think like learning who your support systems can be, like you may not be able to impact your relationship with your advisor, right? But like is there a postdoc there that you can talk to? Is there another advisor that you can add on? Is there communities like this where it's like outside of your institution, but you can just show up and have these conversations here? It's being, I guess, like flexible in whatever capacity you have to like finding your resources and like developing that within yourself.
Yeah.
It can be simple in terms of like I made a joke with my supervisor that like I hate red ink and like red font. And so like when he corrected my stuff, if he could use any other color, that was fine. And so he would just use a blue font. And like that to me was like fine, but it was like a small way to
It's
advocate
such a
for
small
myself,
thing to ask that,
so small, but it like showed that he respected that it mattered to me, right? And so if there are
yeah,
just like small things that you can do that feel safe enough, and you have a relationship enough where you can ask for something like that, I would say start with something like as minute as that and sort of see what the reaction is and what you can handle and what that feels like. I
yeah.
wish that there was like a broad stroke like template I could give people and be like, this is how you advocate for yourself, but it is always more complicated than that.
Yeah, of course, of course. But even something like that, even something like just putting a stand on, you know, please don't use red ink. Like, oh,
Yeah.
such a small thing, such
Hmm.
a small thing to ask for, right?
Absolutely.
Um, and I suppose because you touched on community,
Yeah.
um, and the impact of community in supporting these kind of spaces that maybe don't necessarily exist within the institution. What has been your experience of community-based support? I know I haven't prepped you for this question. Just FYI, everyone, I have not prepped Sydney for this question, but she brought it on herself by mentioning community. So, no, I'm just going to throw her in the deep end here.
That's
Uh,
okay. Um, I actually like digital community, I think was my first like foray into realizing there was academic community. Um, I had started my Instagram account just to be an update account to my friends and family because I was like, I'm going abroad. Nobody in my family had done a PhD. Like, nobody knows what this is going to be like. And then I started finding people's accounts and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many of us online. And like everybody was nice and like nobody would, I was just like blown away. And so that was sort of like my catalyst into even like creating content was I was like, oh, there are people here that like show up and support you and like are excited to see the work that you're doing in ways that like some people who don't understand what being a researcher is like or being in academia, like they don't even necessarily know how to support you. And so what it means to have people that are like in the weeds with you and like understand what it feels like to be like, I need a margarita and we need to talk about reviewer two today. Like that's not something you can like say to everybody and they like understand, right? And so like that's so
yes.
special and like important and needed. Um and so yeah, I think getting like having a group of people who understood sort of the nuances mattered so much to me. Yes, on
Yeah.
the mark. I haven't been keeping up the whole chat, but I did see the mark.
Most important comment, Lydia. Thank you. Really
Yes.
appreciate it. And this whole discussion about mental health.
Yeah, because I mean, I think in-person community for some people in their programs and like research institutions are just hard. And so like I think there's a grief around that, right? And but like finding a way to move through that grief and advocate in other places and like show up with
Yeah.
other people, whether it's online or not, really matters.
Yeah. I think that's really amazing. It's something that I've really found, granted I'm insanely biased when it comes to this community, obviously, but I do find that having that almost consistent support structure of people that aren't in competition with you, that aren't kind of, I sometimes feel like if you're in a group within an institution, there's a little bit of like vying for research positions or projects or things like that. And that can cause that tension, that hostility sometimes. And whereas in a community like this, where it's just groups of people that have come together from all over the world and different programs and different disciplines and different niches, but who all kind of show up for each other,
Mhm.
makes such a massive difference to the whole process
Absolutely.
of
Because
going through academia. It's almost like our own form of play, really.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it's like it's so vulnerable in ways sometimes we don't even really like to talk about, like how much of ourself comes through in our writing and our like research
Yes.
framing. And just like having people that understand what it feels like to put yourself out in those ways, like not even like going and advocating for yourself and your mental health and how that adds to that, but just like doing the research work is exhausting and hard and confusing. And like people that can meet you in that, like that really is important. I always tell people there's something we call mastery play in play therapy, which is like before a child does something like big in terms of like processing, they will do something completable. Like they will line up a bunch of crayons or they will like sort through the play fruits and like organize them or whatever. And that like as adults, we do similar things. Like before we have a meeting, maybe we like absolutely have to empty the dishwasher, or like we must do a load of laundry, or like something
I
that
was
like
just gonna say you definitely have a camera in my house because I did about three this morning before I had to write my
exactly.
chapter.
Yes. And so that's like a for it's not like play in an enjoyable kind of way, but it's something that like works in that same capacity in our brain of like, I'm going to accomplish something. I know that I can do this, right? And just like under not
Yeah.
everybody has jobs or spaces where they understand the need to do a load of laundry before I sit down and write a chapter. Like that's just a unique thing that like we all kind of relate and know what that feels like and the need for that in ways that other people maybe don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's so important, that idea of, we sometimes get so hung up on things like chores, for instance, or like having to do laundry or empty the dishwasher or tidy our space or all that kind of thing as like a form of a chore. And sometimes it is because everyone is different in,
Yeah.
what that means. And but actually it maybe comes down to this idea of, making it a form of play as well, whether
Mm.
it's I'm going to come back to something that it's not new. It's not innovative. I've discovered how easy it is to clean my house when I'm listening to an audiobook, for instance.
Totally.
Not a new thing by any means, but honestly, like finding a good audiobook like The Count of Monte Cristo, which is what I've just finished listening to,
Mhm.
is chunky, and my house has never been cleaner. Because
Absolutely.
it's that great opportunity to actually wind down while doing something. It's not
Yeah.
just sitting there, it's actually crafting or playing or fixing. And I almost feel like when you mention play, there's a difference in play, actually like a physical something, like a physical playing. It's an action rather
Mhm.
than decompressing, for instance, where you just kind of sit still.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there are huge differences in that. And also we need both, right? So like don't overly lean on one or the other, but like learning what you might need is a process in terms of like determining, do I need rest? Do I need play? Do I need to be up energized, down energized? Like that is something that takes like self-awareness and self-attunement, and that is a
Yes.
practice in and of itself. Um, but like not holding on to like this is the way that I care for myself, period. Right? Like allowing it to be something that like changes, and like maybe you'll get tired of audiobooks in 6 months, but like for now this is working for you, right? And so just like
Yeah.
allow that to happen. Um, but yeah, there definitely is a difference in like different times of rest and engagement and how we sort of care for our mental health, but all of it is valuable.
I want to maybe just probe you a little bit on when you sat down and you journaled before you did your PhD.
Yeah.
What were the questions that, or what were your sort of non-negotiables? How did you come to that? What was kind of your process of thinking? Before you answer, I'm just going to let everyone know that we will have some time for questions. So if you have any questions for Sydney, please pop them in the chat. But first, she's going to answer mine. Power of the mic.
Yes. um I think I was coming from a place of thinking about what wasn't working for me and like high school and undergrad. So it was like not asking for help was like a huge one. Like sometimes there were just concepts that were not landing in my brain and like they were psychology related. And I was like, well, I should know this, right? Like I
Yeah,
should be able to figure this out on my own. Something like that, like knowing that I was moving into like, yes, I was trained in play therapy, but there's so much play research that is non-therapeutic that I was like,
yeah,
I am coming into play in a different way. So like I need to be able to tell people like I actually don't understand what this is. I've never like heard of this person before. Like I needed to like have a sort of grounding in like knowing that I knew what I knew and knowing that there was more to know. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like that there was a difference in that. And so like that was something that I wrote down, that like I needed to be able to ask for help and to like tell people when I didn't understand something. Like that was important. Being able to say no to projects that like did not feel aligned to me, or like was not going to serve the work. Like I didn't, and I, because I wasn't moving into like tenure track, I have a lot of privilege in being able to say like I just turned down things that weren't working for me, and not everybody is going to be in that position.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to detract from the work because the work mattered to me so much that like I knew I needed to give my everything to this. And so being able to say like, yeah, I maybe am not building my resume during this time in terms of taking on everything, but like I am doing the work that I need to do. So the things like that, things like I must take 2 days off every day. Like it does not matter if I feel behind or not. Like weekends are important, even if they come on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Like
Yeah.
those things matter. Um, so yeah, they were all little things like that, but also big things, you know, in terms of like what it means to like agree to myself that that's what we're doing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, those were the things. I think it really spawned from realizing what was not working for me before in order
I
to
think
get
that's
here.
so great. What an amazing experience. What an amazing exercise in like that self-reflection to
Hmm.
say, well, this isn't going to work for me, and I'm going to advocate for what is going to work for me. And I think so often we just jump from one thing to the other. I am so guilty of this, like just jumping from one thing to the other without that period of reflection and thinking
Yeah.
about what actually worked versus what didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, our society does not set us up well to do much reflecting. So that does not surprise me.
Oh my goodness. I really, really appreciate this conversation because I think it's so important to it's coming from that place of advocacy for yourself and looking after yourself in the first instance and putting those boundaries to yourself. And I think so many of us in the community and in academia and in life in general just accept the cards that are dealt to us, and instead of actually saying, well, we have the power to stand back and think about how we want to play.
Yes. I think also like we have the mindset, if we advocate for ourselves, we have to like change the whole world, right? Like we have to burn the system down and do it. And like realizing there are so many little steps in between that, right? And advocating
Yeah.
yourself can be a font color change, right? It can be, I don't respond to emails on the weekends, like smaller things, right? But those things do matter and impact like your well-being and your mental health. And so like
Yeah.
that can be enough. Like you can say like, hey, I did this thing for myself today. And like that's it. That's all I needed
That's
to
it.
do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You went for a walk.
Exactly. Hmm.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Sydney. Thank you so, so much. I feel like this has been such a fantastic discussion. I'm just seeing in the chat if anyone has any questions for Sydney. Let's see. If there are no questions usually means you've just explained everything.
Just did it all. No big deal.
You just nailed it in one foul swoop. We actually have a question on the YouTube Live, which is great. Um, we're multitasking all the time, and if we are focused on more than one thing, how do we manage the guilt of not focusing on our other to-do items?
Oof. Guilt.
Guilt.
A big
Let's
one.
talk about that, shall
That's just
we?
a light thing to end on. No big deal. Um, I think guilt a lot of times comes down to expectations that we have of ourselves and them not being grounded in our current capacity or schedule.
Yeah,
Um, and so realizing I think I mean really think it depends on people's like brains and what works for them. Like sometimes it's like evaluating things throughout the day and like saying I'm going to work on just 2 projects today and that is going to be enough. It's like deciding that that is enough, right? Rather than like I could have done this, I could have done that. right? It's like making a choice to say, hey, I'm choosing this, and like fully being in that and just being like, I chose this and this mattered and I got work done and like I can be proud of that. And then
Yeah.
tomorrow I can choose to work on the next thing, right? And so it's like, I think that's sort of an expectation thing when it comes to that, and like deciding if you need to look at your day or your like work stuff as like by day or by week. Like, can you manage does guilt feel different if you say like by the end of the week I got everything done versus like by the end of the day I got everything done? Like, does that
Yeah.
feel different? And so I think it's a lot of experimentation when it comes to like emotional stuff like that, being
Yeah.
playful with it. But there's no, again, magic wand or like magic scheduler that I wish I could give people and be like, yeah, suddenly all of your projects are like well managed and equal and all of that. Like, I wish it was that easy. But yeah,
You
I
would
would
be
say
so wealthy if that was the
I'd
case. If you could just be like
never
out
work
here
again.
being like, this is how you multitask with everything.
Could you imagine?
Actually, if you could come out with that, that'd be great for me
I'll work on
personally.
it. I'll work on
If you could work on that, that'd be great.
it.
Thanks.
On the to-do list.
Thanks. For the end of the year.
Yeah, yeah, no, next year.
No, that's great. Um, we have one other question, which is if you could change something, if you could change one major, if you could see, sorry, wow, English. If you could see one major systemic change you would like to see in academia to make it healthy and more
Mhm.
enjoyable for future generations, what would that be?
Yeah. Um, Inspired by another person, Jane Goodall. So I read on audiobook actually, would recommend. It's a great listen. Her book on hope. And it's like a conversation-based book, really great for the times that we are in, I think. But she talks about how she doesn't present statistics or like facts in any of her talks or quotes or lectures, and everything is story-based. And that is
Love
something I
that.
would love to see change in academia, that like if we could teach people how to like share their work through stories, teach them about like the narrative that their data has told, like I think that would be amazing. Like I even just like kind of momentarily reflecting back on like today, like we talked about like your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and I did not say those words to you, but we covered that with the threat stuff,
Yeah.
right? We talked about
I have no
nonviolent
idea what you just said to me,
communication,
quite honestly.
but you learned
But I
something.
know exactly.
Right. And so like all of those stories and things like matter and they're effective. And that's like what gets people to like remember and change their behaviors. And I think we would like have such a different experience in getting our work out into the world if there were different ways of like considering dissemination and like teaching people how to share their stories in different avenues. Like, if there was a way that like, somebody wrote a short story off of something that they researched, like could that be as successful as like a peer review paper? And like what would that look like?
Yeah.
Because there wouldn't be citations. And um yeah, so that's something I would love to see. I wrote a paper on intergenerational trauma through Encanto, and it is my most cited paper. And it's like three
Wow.
pages. And it is like something that like I think about all the time. And like
Yeah.
people want stories, right? They watched a film, they loved it, they loved the music, and then they learned about a psychologically complex topic through a paper that I wrote. But it was like all story based, it was all media, it was all accessible in these ways. And so that is a shift I would love to see the system take on, which is like encouraging people to share their stories differently.
I love that so much because we talk about so often, we talk about it in our researchers program, this idea of self-centered research, which is that your research is inherently personal
Yeah,
to
totally.
you. And it's you've come to your research for a particular reason, for a particular personal reason.
Mhm.
And we don't talk about that. And yet we're kind of expected to embody that. And I think this ties in so nicely to what you were saying about the idea of research being devotional in that
Mhm.
way, because you're devoting your time to yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and if you're looking at it in that way, why would you not look after yourself if it's all kind of linked in to this beautiful sort of circle of self-promotion in your
Yeah,
research.
that was a beautiful little bow tie at the end of this. Well done.
It's storytelling. I tell you what, this is, I can't believe that it's taken me this long to realize this is how I process information.
Yeah, there you go. Now you know.
Oh my goodness. Well, Sydney, thank you so much. I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat. I haven't seen any. I think we've covered so much in this space. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming onto this talk, coming into the community, talking about such an important thing that I think so many people struggle with in this space and in academia and in life generally. So massive thank you, Sydney, for all the work that you do, and I can't wait to see what the future brings you and what research comes down your way.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to be here.
Lovely, lovely to have you. Thank you, everyone in the room. Thank you to the people that are watching on YouTube and who will watch this in the future. And tomorrow we will be concluding our back to school series with the queen of planning, Miss Kaylin Apple, who will be doing her back to school reset. This is one of our most amazing events that we throw during the year, but usually it's only open to members of the community. And now we will be bringing it live on YouTube tomorrow. So definitely stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you.